Welcome back into the archives, traveller. Tonight we shall explore how cities managed waste before modern garbage. You will discover how medieval and early urban cities removed ash, food waste, and human waste long before trash trucks, plastic bins, or modern sanitation existed. You will observe how waste moved through a city as a managed system. You watch household output, preparation, storage, timing, labor roles, tools, regulation, seasonal changes, and what happened when those systems quietly failed. There is no shock, no urgency, and no dramatization, only structure, routine, and civic discipline. Before we begin, take a moment to let us know where in the world you are watching from. We love to reach far and wide to help our travelers relax and fall asleep. So it is always interesting to see where our travelers are listening from. If you find value in our calm, system-based history, you can support the archive by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the bell so you are notified when new records are added. Now remain still. The system is already in motion. You stand still within the city, not in a single household, but at the point where many households quietly converge. The system begins without announcement, through accumulation rather than event. Waste enters the city's management structure not as refuse in the modern sense, but as byproducts of routine living. From each dwelling, ash appears first. Hearth ash is constant, fine, and predictable. It results from cooking, heating, light, and craft. You observe that ash is not treated as a nuisance. It is dry, lightweight, and often reused. Some is reserved for cleaning, some for traction, some for mortar or soil amendment. Only excess ash becomes waste, and even then it is a controlled material. Its consistency allows it to be handled easily, stored without rot, and transported without urgency. Food remnants enter next. These are not mixed piles. You notice separation through habit rather than instruction. Bones are kept for broth or craft. Vegetable scraps are diverted to animals when possible. Bread ends are dried, soaked, or reused. What remains edible rarely reaches disposal. What does reach disposal does so gradually in small volumes shaped by scarcity rather than abundance. Broken items appear infrequently. Tools are repaired repeatedly before abandonment. Pottery fractures but is often repurposed as fill, drainage material, or packing. Cloth becomes rags, then insulation, then waste. The system receives broken goods only after several internal life cycles have been exhausted. Disposal is delayed by necessity, not regulation. Human waste enters the system separately and deliberately. It does not mix with other inputs at this stage. You observe chamber pots, privies, cesspits, and lined containers. This material is expected, anticipated, and managed as a valuable substance rather than an embarrassment. Its presence in the system is regular, predictable, and shaped by daily rhythms. Commercial inputs differ in scale and composition. Tanneries produce offcuts, lime residue, and liquids. Butchers produce blood, bone, and fat. Brewers generate spent grain and wash water. These inputs are heavier, wetter, and more difficult to manage. You notice that their inclusion in the system is restricted by location rather than volume. They are allowed to exist because they are useful, taxable, and necessary. You observe what does not enter the waste system. Packaging is minimal. Single-use objects are rare. Excess does not exist at scale. The absence of volume is as important as the presence of material. The system is sized for steady flow, not surges. No official records accompany these inputs at the household level. Measurement occurs informally through expectation. When volumes exceed norms, attention follows. The system relies on consistency more than documentation. As you remain still, you see that inputs are shaped long before disposal. Cultural habit, scarcity, reuse, and necessity determine what becomes waste. By the time material enters the management system, it has already been filtered by daily life. This filtering reduces strain before any organized action begins. The city does not attempt to eliminate waste. The city expects waste. The system begins not with removal, but with acceptance of continuous input. Waste is not an anomaly. It is a stable feature entering the system at a rate shaped by survival rather than consumption. You continue to observe as waste transitions from presence to readiness. Preparation occurs quietly inside homes, workshops, and courtyards. Waste is not supervised directly, yet it follows recognizable patterns. These patterns exist because unmanaged waste creates immediate consequences long before official systems intervene. Ash is dried deliberately. Damp ash clumps and spreads. Dry ash pours, stores, and transfers cleanly. You notice containers kept near hearths, lids placed loosely to prevent moisture, and careful separation from organic matter. This preparation allows ash to be stored without smell, insects, or urgency. Food waste is handled with attention to decay. Liquids are drained, scraps are wrapped or contained. Items likely to rot are removed sooner than those that remain inert. You observe that preparation reduces attraction rather than eliminates waste. The goal is delay, not perfection. Human waste receives the most deliberate preparation. Containers are sealed. Additives such as ash, soil, or straw are used to reduce odor and moisture. Chamber pots are emptied on predictable schedules, not when full. This timing minimizes exposure and conflict. Preparation here is essential because failure produces immediate discomfort rather than distant consequence. You observe that preparation tasks are repetitive and unremarkable. They are learned early and corrected socially. When preparation fails, neighbors notice before authorities do. Smell, leakage, and pests serve as early enforcement mechanisms. Formal oversight is unnecessary at this stage. Commercial preparation differs. Tanneries soak, scrape, and rinse materials in stages to separate solids from liquids. Butchers collect blood and offal separately. Brewers drain mash and reuse wash water where possible. Preparation here is driven by secondary value. Waste is sorted not only for disposal but for reuse, sale, or trade. You notice staging areas appear during preparation. Waste does not move immediately. It is held at the edge of private space, near doors, in courtyards, or in designated containers. This liminal positioning allows inspection, correction, and coordination before removal. Preparation also includes restraint. Items that could be disposed of are sometimes retained. A cracked vessel may be set aside rather than discarded immediately. Delay reduces movement and labor. The system benefits from hesitation. No written instructions guide this process. Knowledge is practical, inherited, and reinforced through consequence. Preparation is shaped by what fails, not by what is ideal. As time passes, you observe preparation happening without urgency. There is no rush to remove waste immediately because the system expects periodic collection. Prepared waste can wait without disruption. Preparation transforms waste into a manageable form. It reduces risk, volume, and conflict before any cart, pit, or worker becomes involved. This layer absorbs variability, allowing downstream systems to remain stable. The city's waste system depends on this invisible stage. Without preparation, later layers would collapse under unpredictability. With preparation, waste becomes a predictable input rather than a constant emergency. You watch as prepared materials accumulate quietly, ready to enter the next layer when timing allows. You observe as prepared waste settles into waiting places. Storage is not an afterthought. It is a designed pause within the system, shaped by space, volume, and tolerance. Nothing is hidden, yet nothing is meant to draw attention. At the household level, storage begins close to where waste is produced. Ash buckets sit near hearth walls, food remnants are placed in covered vessels. Human waste containers remain indoors or in enclosed courtyards. These locations are chosen to balance access and isolation. This waste cannot be positioned too far, or the transport of it will become disruptive. If positioned too close, daily life will suffer. You observe that storage capacity is intentionally limited. Containers are sized to match expected removal schedules. Overflow is not accommodated by design. When capacity is exceeded, discomfort appears quickly. This limitation enforces discipline without supervision. Storage teaches restraint through inconvenience. Midden heaps appear at the edge of residential zones. Some are permanent, others exist only for a season or a project. You note that these heaps are not random piles. They are placed with attention to drainage, wind direction, and access routes. Location matters more than concealment. Temporary dump zones exist near construction sites, markets, or city gates. These zones operate under rules rather than improvisation. You notice boundaries marked by habit, stone, or fencing. Waste placed outside these zones draws notice. Storage is spatially regulated even when signage is absent. Commercial storage differs again. Tanneries maintain pits and vats designed to hold waste liquids and solids separately. Butchers store offal briefly before transfer. Brewers stack spent grain where animals or buyers can access it. Commercial storage prioritizes turnover, but still relies on containment. You observe that stored waste remains visible. The system does not attempt to erase it. Visibility allows monitoring. Neighbors know when removal is late. Ward officials notice accumulation during routine movement. Storage functions as an indicator, not a solution. Duration matters. Some materials can wait days, others require rapid movement. The system distinguishes these through container choice and placement rather than written schedules. Perishable waste is stored closer to exits. Inert waste remains deeper within properties. Weather influences storage behavior. Rain requires covers, heat shortens tolerance, cold extends holding time. Storage practices adjust quietly without announcement as conditions change. You notice that storage creates predictable pressure points. When containers fill, action must follow. The system depends on these pressure points to trigger movement without centralized coordination. Nothing in storage is meant to be permanent. Even middens serve future purposes. Waste waits, but it is always expected to leave. Storage exists to smooth timing, reduce conflict, and prepare waste for coordinated removal. As you stand still, waste accumulates contained and quiet, marking time rather than demanding attention. You continue observing as the city regulates not space but time. Movement is restricted more carefully than placement. Timing controls exposure, congestion, and conflict without requiring constant enforcement. You notice that waste removal aligns with low activity periods. Night soil collection occurs before dawn. Carts move when streets are empty. Dumping windows open and close according to habit. The city does not announce these times. They are known through repetition. Timing protects public space. Markets operate during daylight. Waste movement avoids those hours. Religious observances alter schedules. Seasonal daylight shifts change acceptable windows. Coordination emerges from shared understanding rather than posted rules. You observe that households prepare waste in anticipation of these windows. Containers are filled, sealed, and staged beforehand. Missed timing results in delay, not improvisation. Waste waits rather than moving outside. Allowed periods. Commercial timing is stricter. Tanneries release wastewater at approved hours to avoid downstream disruption. Butchers remove offal before market activity begins. Brewers coordinate mash disposal with animal feeding schedules. These timings reduce conflict between systems that share space. You notice that carts follow established routes. They avoid narrow streets during busy hours. They use wider lanes and edges of the city. Route selection is part of timing. Movement is planned to minimize interaction rather than maximize speed. Coordination relies on predictability. Workers arrive when expected, residents listen for familiar cues, absence is noticed, presence is tolerated. The system functions because deviation is visible. You observe informal signals. Open doors indicate readiness. Covered containers signal delay. Empty storage areas indicate successful removal. These signals replace documentation. Enforcement is minimal at this layer. Violations draw fines or corrections later. Immediate intervention is rare. The system assumes compliance because non-compliance creates inconvenience rather than spectacle. Timing also manages risk. Night movement reduces social friction. Limited windows prevent accumulation in public view. Coordination reduces the need for explanation. Waste moves when fewer people are watching. You notice that the city does not aim for efficiency as speed. It aims for efficiency with minimal disruption. Waste moves slowly but predictably. As time passes, you see that coordination holds the system together. Storage creates pressure. Timing releases it. Movement occurs not because someone orders it, but because the hour arrives. You watch as carts pass, containers empty, and streets return to normal use. The system resets quietly, ready for the next cycle. You observe as the system reveals its human structure. Labor appears not as personality, but as function. Individuals move through roles shaped by repetition, expectation, and limitation. No single worker controls the system. Each performs a narrow task within a larger arrangement. At the base level, household members perform preparatory labor. This work is unpaid, expected, and continuous. Containers are emptied, lids replaced, materials separated. These actions are learned early and repeated without acknowledgement. Household labor is the foundation upon which all other roles depend. Specialized labor begins where waste leaves private space. Night soil collectors operate during restricted hours. Their role is defined by timing rather than visibility. They work when the city is quiet, following known routes, handling sealed containers. Their task is removal, not judgment. They do not inspect contents beyond what affects handling. Carters perform transport labor. They move waste from collection points to pits, fields, or dump zones. Their work requires knowledge of routes, weight limits, and surface conditions. Speed is secondary to stability. A spilled load creates immediate consequences. Precision matters more than strength. Pit tenders and dump wardens manage receiving sites. They regulate placement rather than volume. Waste is directed to specific areas within pits or heaps. Mixing is controlled. Layers form deliberately. These workers shape accumulation so that future use or removal remains possible. Commercial waste introduces additional roles. Tanneries employ workers to separate solids and liquids. Butchers assign labor to offal handling. Brewers rely on mash carriers and collectors. These roles exist to prevent interference with primary production. Waste labor protects core labor. Oversight labor operates intermittently. Ward officials observe rather than participate. Their presence is occasional. They rely on familiarity with normal conditions. Deviations draw attention. Their authority is reactive, not constant. You observe that labor roles overlap spatially, but not temporally. The same street hosts multiple workers at different hours. This separation reduces conflict. No coordination meeting is required. Time itself organizes labor. Social status varies. Some roles are stigmatized, others are tolerated, few are respected, yet all are necessary. The system does not reward dignity, it rewards consistency. Labor is compensated irregularly. Some workers are paid by households, others by guilds or landholders. Some receive in-kind payment. The system accommodates varied compensation because labor tasks are modular. You notice that labor adapts to constraint. When carts break, loads shrink. When workers are absent, collection slows. The system absorbs these changes without collapse because responsibilities are narrow and distributed. As you continue observing, labor cycles repeat. Workers arrive, perform, and leave. No announcements mark their presence. The system relies on their predictability rather than recognition. You continue to watch as the system reveals its physical boundaries. Tools appear simple, worn, and specific. Their limitations define what the system can and cannot do. Constraint is not a flaw, it is a stabilizing force. Containers are small. Buckets, tubs, and pots limit volume at the source. This prevents sudden surges. Weight remains manageable. Spills remain localized. The system depends on these limits to prevent escalation. Carts are narrow and slow. Wheels resist uneven surfaces. Loads must be balanced carefully. Routes are chosen to minimize incline and obstruction. Tools enforce caution through difficulty. Excess is discouraged by effort. Lids, covers, and seals appear repeatedly. Their function is containment, not concealment. They reduce odor, moisture, and loss. Failure to use them produces immediate discomfort. Compliance is reinforced by consequence rather than rule. Shovels, rakes, and forks manage placement rather than removal. Waste is layered, not piled randomly. This preserves capacity and future use. Tools shape behavior by enabling only certain motions. Pits impose vertical limits. Once filled, action must follow. Middens spread horizontally until regulated. Boundaries exist because space is finite. The system responds to these limits by adjusting timing and labor. You observe that tools rarely improve rapidly. Replacement is slow. Innovation is conservative. New tools appear only when old ones fail repeatedly. Stability matters more than optimization. Environmental constraints dominate. Rain increases weight, mud slows carts, frost freezes pits, heat accelerates decay. Tools cannot overcome these forces. They adapt around them. You notice that constraints prevent overreach. The system cannot move all waste at once. It cannot hide accumulation. It cannot accelerate indefinitely. These limitations keep operations aligned with capacity. Maintenance is constant. Tools are repaired repeatedly. Replacement is delayed. Broken tools interrupt flow, not catastrophically, but noticeably. The system pauses rather than compensates aggressively. You see that constraints distribute responsibility. No single failure overwhelms the system. When one tool fails, others continue. The system degrades gradually, not suddenly. As you remain still, tools pass through view, used and reused. Their simplicity ensures reliability. Their limits ensure discipline. The system functions not despite constraint, but because of it. You remain stationary as the system reveals its governing layer. Regulation does not announce itself loudly. It appears through repetition, boundary, and consequence. Oversight exists, but it does not hover. It waits. Rules governing waste are specific and narrow. You observe prohibitions against dumping after certain hours, restrictions on where waste may be placed, and distinctions between household and commercial disposal. These rules are not abstract. They respond to known problems. Each exists because an earlier version of the system failed without it. Oversight begins locally. Ward boundaries divide responsibility into manageable areas. Officials know their streets, their residents, and typical conditions. They do not inspect constantly. They recognize deviation when it appears. Familiarity replaces surveillance. You notice that enforcement relies on visibility rather than pursuit. Waste left in the wrong place remains there. Its presence identifies the responsible party. Neighbors recognize habits. Repetition narrows suspects. Oversight leverages social proximity rather than investigation. Fines exist, but they are measured. Penalties discourage repetition rather than punish severity. The system aims for compliance, not deterrence through fear. Payment restores order. Non-payment escalates gradually. Commercial oversight is stricter. Tanneries, butchers and brewers operate under location and timing restrictions. Their waste threatens other systems. Markets, water access and public streets require protection. Regulation clusters risk rather than dispersing it. You observe that oversight does not manage volume directly. It manages placement, timing and method. Excess volume becomes visible through overflow and smell. These signs trigger intervention. The system waits for evidence rather than prediction. Documentation exists sporadically. Charters, ordinances and guild rules record expectations. Daily enforcement relies less on text and more on memory. Officials carry rules mentally, reinforced by habit. Oversight adapts. When a rule proves insufficient, it is revised locally. New restrictions appear near markets, wells, or gates. Regulation evolves in response to friction rather than theory. You notice that the system avoids constant confrontation. Officials intervene after patterns emerge. Singular mistakes are tolerated. Repeated violations draw attention. Oversight is patient. As time passes, you see that regulation stabilizes the system without exhausting it. The city does not attempt to control waste completely. It constrains behavior enough to preserve shared space. You remain still as order persists through expectation, familiarity, and measured response. The system holds without spectacle. You continue observing as the year shifts. The system does not reinvent itself. It stretches, tightens, and slows. Seasonal change alters conditions, not design. In winter, movement becomes difficult. Frozen ground hardens pits, snow narrows routes, carts move slower, collection intervals lengthen, storage fills closer to capacity. You observe increased reliance on ash and cover materials to extend holding time. Night soil handling changes. Frozen containers resist emptying. Workers adjust timing to daylight when necessary. Removal favors locations where soil remains workable. The system accepts reduced efficiency rather than forcing output. Spring introduces thaw. Pits soften, roads degrade, mud replaces ice, loads become heavier. Spillage risk increases. You observe smaller loads and more frequent trips. The system compensates by redistributing labor rather than accelerating pace. Summer compresses tolerance. Heat accelerates decay. Odor becomes immediate. Storage duration shortens. Collection frequency increases where possible. You notice earlier movement windows and stricter adherence to timing. Autumn brings volume. Harvest waste increases organic output. Markets generate surplus remnants. Brewers and processors intensify activity. The system absorbs this through expanded staging areas and temporary dump zones. You observe that seasonal variation affects labor availability. Agricultural cycles draw workers away. Urban labor contracts during harvest. The system responds by slowing non-essential movement rather than competing for labor. Regulation flexes seasonally. Enforcement intensifies near wells during summer. Winter dumping rules relax where movement becomes hazardous. Oversight adapts to risk rather than uniformity. Tools respond to season. Covers thicken. Containers are reinforced. Routes shift toward more stable surfaces. Maintenance increases during transitional periods. You notice that no announcements mark these changes. Adjustment occurs through experience. The system remembers previous seasons. Anticipation replaces surprise. Despite variation, structure remains constant. Inputs continue. Preparation persists. Storage waits. Timing governs movement. Labor performs. Tools constrain. Oversight watches. Only conditions change. As the year turns, you see the system endure by yielding rather than resisting. Seasonal pressure reveals flexibility, not fragility. You watch as winter returns and the cycle continues without declaration. At this point, the system encounters strain. Failure does not arrive as collapse. It appears as delay, overflow, and omission. The system reveals its weak points gradually under conditions it was never designed to exceed. Overcrowding stresses storage first. As dwellings subdivide and population density increases, containers fill faster than removal schedules anticipate. Preparation remains consistent, but capacity shrinks. Waste waits longer. Middens grow outward. The system does not fail immediately. It stretches until inconvenience becomes persistent. You observe that timing falters next. Collection windows remain fixed while volume increases. Missed windows accumulate. Waste staged for removal waits an extra cycle. This delay compounds. Streets tolerate more presence. Oversight notices patterns rather than incidents. Labor becomes a constraint during disruption. War draws workers away. Illness reduces availability. Conscription interrupts routine roles. Tasks are skipped rather than reassigned. The system slows unevenly, revealing which roles are essential and which are supplemental. Tools fail quietly. Carts break under heavier loads. Containers crack. Repairs lag. Movement slows. Spillage increases. Each failure adds friction rather than spectacle. The system absorbs loss by reducing scope. Environmental stress accelerates failure. Prolonged frost locks pits. Heavy rain collapses midden edges. Drought limits washing and cover materials. These conditions expose dependencies previously unnoticed. Waste that relies on soil absorption or moisture control becomes unmanageable. Regulation weakens under stress. Enforcement prioritizes critical areas. Market streets receive attention. Peripheral zones are ignored. Rules remain, but response becomes selective. Oversight conserves effort. You notice that failure concentrates at boundaries. City edges, alleys, and informal dump zones accumulate excess. These areas absorb strain until they become visible. The center remains functional longer. The system does not attempt comprehensive correction. It accepts partial failure. Waste accumulates where it causes least disruption. Order is preserved where it matters most. You observe that recovery follows restoration of timing and labor. Once pressure eases, removal resumes. Accumulation decreases slowly. The system does not reset instantly. Memory of failure lingers through adjusted habits. Failure teaches without instruction. New rules emerge after repeated strain. Storage limits change. Dump zones relocate. Timing adjusts. The system evolves through damage rather than planning. As the strain recedes, the system resumes, altered but intact, carrying evidence of where it bent. You continue observing as waste completes its movement. Nothing disappears. The system ends not in removal, but in transformation and placement. Ash reaches fields, construction sites, or road surfaces. It becomes a fill, traction, or soil amendment. Its journey ends where it supports other systems. The city exports stability through residue. Human waste leaves the city boundary. It enters agriculture through deliberate application. Fields receive it according to season and crop. Sale and exchange formalize its value. What began as private output became communal input elsewhere. Midden heaps settle, layers compress, materials break down. Over time, middens become ground. Foundations rise on former waste. City edges advance over accumulated residue. Disposal reshapes geography. Commercial waste follows varied paths. Spent grain feeds animals, bones enter craft production, liquids drain into managed channels. Nothing is neutral, each output connects to another process. You observe that end-of-cycle outcomes are delayed. Waste remains present for long periods before transformation completes. The system tolerates this visibility. Completion is gradual. No final inspection marks the end. The system recognizes completion through absence. Empty containers return. Storage spaces are clear, routes quiet. The next cycle begins without ceremony. The city does not aim for cleanliness, it aims for continuity. Waste leaves the immediate environment and enters longer processes beyond the walls. You notice that outcomes reinforce behavior upstream. When reuse benefits are visible, preparation improves. When disposal sites fail, regulation tightens. The end of the cycle informs the beginning. As you watch, the system continues looping. Inputs arrive, preparation repeats, storage fills, timing releases, labor moves, tools constrain, oversight watches, seasons shift, failure teaches, outcomes settle. Nothing concludes as the system persists. You continue to observe, silent and unmoving, as the city manages what it produces day after day, without modern garbage, without urgency, and without pause. And so that was the way of it, traveller. Nothing concludes in the way modern stories expect. Containers empty and refill, routes clear and close again. Waste moves out of sight, not out of existence. The city continues without comment, held together by habits that do not announce their importance. What you have observed is not a single moment in time, but a structure repeating itself day after day. There is only management and quiet enforcement, labor that remains mostly unseen, and systems that work best when no one has to think about them. If you would like to continue visiting these systems of the past, you can like this video, subscribe to the channel, and if you wish to be notified when new records are added to the archive, you may ring the bell. For now, there is nothing else you need to do except to relax and drift off. The archive remains open and never closes.